Okay. We're now ready. It's amazing when this is actually my laptop on my Leaks Owl, and it is doing some things that are terribly different than anything I've ever seen. But I'm hoping it's working right now, and I hope the people who are on the screen remotely are able to see it. Let us know if you can't. I'm Susan Martin. I'm with the League of Women Voters of the San Juans, and I've also was the chair of the. Let me just get this out. I have a couple of copies of the study that we did last year, so people can look at it on that. Well, we ran out of them because we had so much demand for them. We'll be trying to get some more for the, well, we'll talk later about what we're doing at the convention. But I will hopefully have more of them published by then or printed by then. So anyway, I'm also have been the co-chair of the League of Women Voters of the San Juans, and then working on concurrence, and I'm a member of the board, and so that's me. What we've been working on over the last 2 years plus is the protecting the rights of immigrants in the United States. And we have a team that has been working on that. And that includes not only me, but also particularly Lydia Sedito, who is will be talking after I do, and then Janet Leonard and Shelley Neep, who is where there. We've been the team on concurrent, the concurrence process. Okay, so what does it mean to be moving from a state position, which we have in force right now in Washington State, to a national concurrence where everyone in the league in the United States will be adopting the position that's been made. And so we proposed the concurrence with the idea that, much as it's great having this position for Washington State, immigration is an issue, and immigrant rights in particular are issues that are all over the country. And we're seeing it pop up. I can tell you when we started, we were really thinking of how to integrate and welcome immigrants into the country. I had a feeling that things might get worse. How worse it's gotten, I think is beyond anyone's imagination. And I've been working on this issue for the last 45 years or so, and I've never seen it as bad as this. But the League of Women Voters in general has a policy on immigration. So we're though looking at a slightly different issue that relates very much to immigration issues, but that's the rights of the immigrants themselves, regardless of when they come, for what reasons, and where they're living within the now country, we hope. So basically, immigration is the process through which people are admitted to the country, and the enforcement of their entry, and whether they're deportable or not, and detention, and that's has an issue there as well. Whereas immigrants are, what we're really doing is looking at what is it that immigrants need, what are their rights to have those services, and where do we go from here in terms of continuing to protect immigrant rights, particularly in a situation where there's not much that can be done immediately, but a lot that can be done over a period of time. So the position that we have developed here allows us to advocate for policies on who comes into the country. That's through the immigration part of it. And then we can use our new policy, but to be able to talk about issues that are going well beyond just entry on them.
Yeah.
So this is the position in brief that many of you have seen before because we've been using it and talking about it. But it's important to, again, keep thinking about what does this position mean? So one of the things that we've been trying to get understood better is that all residents, regardless of their immigration status or their citizenship, should be treated with dignity and respect. That obviously is not happening today in many parts of the country. So that's one of our first concerns. And this means a lot of things. It means that residents, rather than citizens or immigrants, and certainly not aliens, which is no longer to be used in Washington State, which partly thanks to Lydia and her colleagues' work this year, but that they should have access to a number of things, essential services. Healthcare is one part of it, but there are others, housing, there are other essential services. People can't, live without these services. The legal representation in court. Right now, most of the immigrants who are being deported or being pushed into self-deporting have never no criminal actions that they've ever taken. It's all civil action. And as a result of that, they can have a lawyer, but the government doesn't have any responsibility for providing it, waiting for them to get attorneys or representatives, et cetera, on that. And then, in the fairly large context, they have the right to live and work in safety. And immigrants are, famously not having jobs that have safety. They're getting the jobs that are quite dangerous very often, and they don't have recourse. I've been in places where the inspections are going on for the workers in a particular place, and all of a sudden, the owner of it starts yelling because they know that they're going to be dinged with money, because of what they're doing to their workers. They start saying, ice, 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 or whatever is the terminology of the moment. And all the workers leave and they never get paid. They never get anything about them. They're totally exploited. And so what we want to do is make sure that no one is exploited, whether they're immigrants or others. And then we want to make sure that the rights of the immigrants are respected by politicians, that the people who run our different programs across the state and now hopefully the nation, to ensure that they protect these very, very fundamental rights. And one of the things we found in our research on the project was that the league did not have any references to xenophobia when listing all of the things that you don't want to have happen on it. So we made the case, which I think is quite an important one, that there is an obligation to condemn xenophobia in and of itself, regardless of whether it's related to race, religion, nationality, et cetera, that the xenophobia itself is something that we need to do something with, and also anti-immigrant rhetoric. So that's the position in brief. We're on the road to concurrence. The end of this slide has June 24th to 28th. And that's when we'll be in Columbus. How many people are going to convention, either in person or online? Great, thank you. And what we would like very much is to support us. Please vote for concurrence. Please talk to anybody you meet on the street or, who's going to Columbus, then tell them about it. We'll have stickers and stuff that we can give out. But it's really important what we found in talking with the US League is that if you don't have a lot of people speaking up about what you're doing, it's less likely that it's going to go through. And that's the big problem, is that while the US League has determined that they will support and recommend to members of the delegates to the convention that they support our concurrence, and we're the only concurrence that they're supporting right now, even though there's some very good ones that need support. Anyway, that what we need to make sure is that we can get over the 2/3 criteria for the election or the vote on concurrence. So that's where we are on concurrence. Please help us. Let me go to the rest of it. Mostly will be Lydia will be talking about, but we're convinced that having a position in and of itself is worthless. It's only a good thing if we have the ability to take action based on that position. And so our focus is starting to turn very much from just the position to making some decisions about how we in Washington State leagues and have spread the word to other leagues can use the position in order to make things better. So that it becomes a really active position, not just a piece of paper that everybody says, oh, isn't it great, we've done that, but then do nothing about it on it. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and we're going to have all of you meeting in smaller groups later on. But one of the things we're thinking about is an affinity group on both immigration and the protection of immigrant rights. Understanding that there's separate issues but there are enough overlaps that we need to really think about all of these issues in relationship to both immigration and the rights of immigrants. And we see it as a collaborative place, an affinity group. This is all out of our LWVWA materials in terms of what an affinity group is. But what we're hoping is that we can do things like have speakers coming in and telling us what are the big issues coming up, and do that regularly, so that we can educate ourselves about the situation of immigrants in the state. We can have help out with what Lydia is going to be talking about in being able to train people who are in the affinity group to also help with lobbying on that. So there are lots of things, and what we're hoping for is that we'll have one table that talks specifically about an affinity group. I hope those who have been part of affinity groups in the league will join that to talk about how we can structure it, what we should be doing, what we should be thinking about to make an affinity group a place where we can move into action and not just pride ourselves on our positions. So let me stop there because I want to give Lydia room.
Thank you, Angela. You know that I need your help.
Why did you go? I'm over here. Stuff that's.
Trying to find where that file is again.
It should be on the drive.
There we go.
Susan, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, going to convention, there's not a limit on how many concurrences of the league can approve or not at the
Yeah.
national level. And immigration is such a presence right now. What do you see as potential, disagreement with, you know, with the concurrence? Because you're saying that we really need to lobby to get it through. I'm just curious what you're thinking some of the opposition might be.
You can get it out off.
Just answer her question. We'll do it.
Okay, I was talking with another group about the very same thing. When we first approached the Texas League, we got some pushback on it, and the pushback was that they said was, it's great you're doing this. We really agree with everything you're doing. But if we start doing too much work on immigration of the sort that you're talking about, we're gonna not be able to talk with members of the legislature because they'll consider us to be,
Right, but
and so that's what I'm worried about, that we may have some people who them personally wouldn't care about, would like to have
the
the,
position just says we have this position, so if you choose to do something, the league has this. Doesn't mean that Texas has to do anything, it just means the
Right.
position is
yeah,
there.
but they were
And
still
they know
nervous.
that,
They were still nervous.
understand.
And so, I'm very, very optimistic.
Yeah,
I think when we had a resolution,
Okay.
a couple of years ago on immigration and immigrant rights, I think only 14 people didn't support it on that. So we do have delegates, for the most part, are going to be really interested in having this become a national position. I'm just trying to figure out ways of dealing with those who are going to be a little bit leery about it.
got it.
And it is a higher threshold to adopt by concurrence. It's a 2/3.
Right, I saw the number, but I would
Yeah.
think there would be, so that's why I'm just curious, but.
Yeah.
I understand that, but again, they could pass it and just ignore it.
Right.
Which is a great segue. So we have a position. What can we do with it? One thing is nothing, right? That is an option. We can also use it on the lobby team. And I am the lobby team for immigrant rights for Washington. We adopted the position last June. This past legislative session was the first legislative session after we passed it. And I was the only one who volunteered for the lobby team for immigrant rights. So I was the lobby team. But just a reminder about lobbying for legislation in the state legislature, you have to have a position before you can do it. So you cannot lobby for immigrant rights unless you have a position. So one of the reasons for having concurrence is obviously so that states can choose to lobby or not. And as Susan mentioned, the national position has to do with immigration policy, who gets in, who doesn't. The immigrant rights position has to do with what happens to people once they're here, what rights do they have in state and local government. And so how does a lobby team work? Many of you get the legislative newsletter every week during legislative session, but maybe you don't know how the lobby team works. Well, it's divided into issues or topics. So immigrant rights is one of them. There's also like natural resources, agriculture, children's, judicial issues. There's many, many different topics. And each team will handle legislation that has to do with that topic. Those teams identify and prioritize bills in the state legislature relevant to our positions. Again, they have to have a position in order to lobby for that legislation. What happens though is that particularly with this immigrant rights position, there's no such thing as an immigrant or an immigration committee in the legislature. So all the legislation that has to do with immigrants, and there were over 100 bills in this past legislative session that had the word immigrant or immigration in it. They all cross boundaries. So that means that I have to communicate with the other issues chairs to make sure we know who is taking the lead on particular bills. So there's bills that have to do with agriculture that deal with immigrants. Does the agricultural chair take it or do I take it? So we have these discussions about who is the lead, because only one person can represent the league in testifying. So we identify who's the point person. We also collaborate with partner organizations. So we have one partner organization for immigrant rights, and that's WISN, Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. But it's a super powerful partner because they actually are a coalition of over 500 immigrant rights organizations within the state of Washington. And they lobby for immigrant issues in the state legislature. So they've been an amazing partner to work with and to learn from. And so we're part of their coalition now too. We also communicate with legislators about legislation. We ask questions, we ask for clarification. And in some cases, legislators contact. I was surprised when I got my first email from a legislator asking me for a specific language for a bill that they were sponsoring. And I was like, whoa, I think I've arrived. And we always have to develop and give testimony about legislation. The testimony will be given in committee. It will be given on the House floor, the Senate floor. So there's multiple opportunities to give testimony about any particular bill. And we always give, pro or con or other. Other can be when we're asking questions about legislation or we have some comments about it. Oftentimes you take the other stance when you want to support a bill, but there's a problem with it. For example, when they're talking, there were several bills that came out that talked about ICE. And one of the comments I kept making was, I think you mean federal immigration enforcement, because there's more than just ICE. There's CBP, there's bounty hunters, there's many other things. And then also the other thing that the lobby team does is it provides content for the weekly newsletter. During legislative sessions, there is a weekly newsletter that goes out with all of the issues on it. You get it on Sunday night, and you have usually 24 to 48 hours to respond to it. And sorry, folks, but that's just the way it is. That's the way the legislature works. We are frantically putting these newsletters together on Friday, and they're due like Saturday morning. Then there's editing that goes on during Saturday, because we don't know what's happening with legislation until like 5 p.m. on Friday, because it might have passed a committee, it might not have. So we're frantically putting these newsletters together. And then usually there's another hearing or something where there might be a vote. And so we need you to respond by Monday or Tuesday afternoon to get a pro or a con or comment even. And we're just asking you mostly just to sign in pro, sign in con. It's really pretty easy. It does take a little bit of time, and you do have to sort of set aside remember on Sunday evening to look for that email during the legislative session. And it makes a difference because they do count how many people signed in pro, how many people signed in con on bills. And that does make a difference for some legislators. So those action alerts are super important. So what do you actually do if you're on an issues team? One of the things is you identify relevant bills. So what bills have to do with immigrants? You have to actually read the bills. That is fun or not. You actually have to research the bills, get information, get facts. You need to develop testimony and you need to develop content for the weekly newsletter. Those are the main tasks of being on the lobby, on any lobby team. And I need volunteers to help with the immigrant rights lobby team. So if anybody is interested, please contact me. I desperately need people to help me with this. I was really, of the 100 bills that I found that had to do with immigrants, I was basically only able to really track and testify for about 18, because it was just so much work for one person. How do we find out about bills? This state of Washington has an amazing resource. We are very, very, very lucky. We are one of the few states that has this resource. Yeah, leg.wa.gov has all the information about bills on it. And so that is a really important resource. Many states do not have this kind of access to legislation. It's really difficult for people to find out about bills in their state, not in this state. We should be very proud of that. We also find out information from our partner organizations. I leaned heavily on the folks in Wyson and took a lot of guidance from them about bills that they were identifying. I met with them weekly during the legislative session, along with many other people, and we shared bills, we shared testimony, and it was a great experience. And then obviously legislators. We are in contact with legislators. We talk to them. We find out what bills they may be sponsoring or if they're going to sponsor bills, because you would have thought in the short legislative session that they would have had the bills all ready and written before the session started. They were introducing bills until the last minute. So in some cases, we're waiting to hear from them about what was being submitted. And this is just a sample page of what we have on leg.wa.gov. So on any given bill, this is Senate Bill 6045, there is information about who sponsored the bill. There is information about whether there's a companion bill. So this is a Senate bill. Is there a companion bill in the House? And if you click on that, it will take you to that House bill, and you can then compare the two. There's information on the status, where it is. Is it in committee? Is it on a vote? Is it in rules? Where is it at? So you always have an update on the status, and it's pretty much updated, not in real time, but certainly daily. You have the actual bill, a link that will take you to the actual bill. And you have information that will also take you to the bill reports. These are really, really handy. The bills themselves can be sometimes difficult to understand. I found myself several times reading through the same sentence 5 times, trying to understand what it meant. But the bill reports generally summarize what the bills are about. The problem is they don't necessarily have all the details. So I often start with the bill reports and then go read the bill so that I can try to understand it. How do we prioritize bills? How many bills was it? 2,000 submitted in this last legislative session? And very few pass. That is the rule. Very few bills pass. So how do we prioritize the bills? They have to fit our position. We have to be able to defend our testimony based on our position. So I was constantly like rereading the position that we wrote to check myself to see if I was actually, supporting legislation based on our position, right? That we, so it has to fit with the position. We prioritize often by checking with our partner organizations. What's their priority? How can we support them by putting maybe something up a little higher on our priority list to help them? But we also have to think about reality. Like, what were the chances of a bill passing? And in this last legislative session, anything to have to do with money or budget was not gonna pass. It was a waste of time to even, I mean, it's sad, but it wasn't gonna pass. So you have to be a realist. And then you also have to think about the impact and scope of the bills. Because some bills work around the edges and some bills are really substantive. So I can't say that there's a perfect formula. All I can say is that these are things you consider. How do you testify? How do you create testimony? So just as in your local leagues, only your president can speak on behalf of the league. Only the issues chair can provide testimony on that particular issue to the legislature. So I was the only person in the league who could testify on behalf of the League of Washington about bills affecting immigrants. I can designate somebody if I can't do the testimony, but essentially the issue chairs have been designated from Karen Crowley, from the president of the league. We're designees to speak on behalf of the league because we are lobbyists. And I will tell you, one really beneficial thing about being officially a lobbyist, an unpaid lobbyist, is I cannot donate to any candidate campaign. I can't legally donate. So I just keep telling everybody, I'm sorry, I can't donate.
Saving the residents.
Yeah, I am saving a lot of money. So you have to get your facts straight. This is the League of Women Voters for sake, and we have to get our information straight, right? And so we check and double check our facts, right? And that's where a team really comes in handy, is to check stuff for us. We got to read the bill. We got to get supporting data. We have to get information. And then we have to write the testimony up. And then we have to edit it about 10 times to get it into some very concise and clear argument, because you don't have a lot of time. At the very most, you're going to have 3 minutes, and you never have 3 minutes. It's usually more like 60 seconds. And so you have to make sure that your text is concise. It has all of the points you want to say, and that you need to practice it. You absolutely need to practice out loud, like you're some sort of crazy person talking. But you have to, because it's the only way you can get it down to a very clear and concise format. And you have to have shorter and longer versions available. So you might think you're going to be testifying for 3 minutes, and then you're sitting there in the hearing listening, and you realize, well, I guess I have 2 minutes. Okay, now I guess I have 90 seconds. Okay, it looks like I got 60. You know, and you know, sometimes you might be down to 30 seconds, and that's it. And sometimes you're sitting there waiting because you spend a lot of time waiting to testify, and you don't even get to testify. It's really frustrating. But that's just part of the whole.
Part of the fun.
It's part of the fun, yeah. But it's interesting even just sitting and waiting, because you see what the arguments are. You see what other people are arguing against. You see what the dynamics of the committee. If it's a committee, it's really interesting to see the dynamics of the legislators on the committee and how they interact with each other and the questions they ask. And you can pretty much tell how they're going to vote by what they say. But it is very interesting to just see what's going on. And then you wind up having people recognize you too, because, you know, like, people will contact you because they saw you testify, and they'll contact you about information or other things that they have. We had some wins in the 2026 legislative session. I won't go through all of these because there's too many, and we're short of time. But I will mention that we did get through the substitute House Bill 2105, Immigrant Worker Protection. This provides a 72-hour notice to immigrants when there's going to be an ICE audit at their workplace. This is important for people to be able to get their paperwork together to make sure there's no mistakes or there's no omissions or deletions. You don't want to get deported because of a technical problem, right? You want to have an opportunity to get your paperwork together. Substitute House Bill 2355 was also super, super important. This was the first time that domestic workers, people, actually women, mostly immigrant women of color, who work in people's houses as domestic workers, had the right, after this bill is passed, to a minimum wage, to a written contract in a language they understand, to privacy, to non-retaliation if they have complaints. So super important bill. The automated license plate reader, that was kind of a mixed bag. We got some guardrails put on through the bill, but unfortunately, rather than retaining records for only 72 hours, they were retained for 21 days. So that was mixed bag. A lot of bills failed that had to do with immigrants. Again, I can't go through all of these, but one of them was requiring law enforcement to document immigration enforcement. That did not pass. It was fought very hard by police who did not want to support this, who testified strongly against this. They did not want to document immigration enforcement. And all it was just turn on your cameras and report back to your precinct. That's it. And they did, and they were very much against it. One that I talk about a little bit more is 5906, protecting sensitive areas from federal immigration enforcement. This bill was sponsored by the AG, by the Attorney General, and it did not pass. And it was supposed to protect places like schools and healthcare facilities, et cetera, from immigration enforcement, and it did not pass. And then another one is fining private detention facilities that bar inspections. So we have a bill that passed in the state that allows the Department of Health to inspect private detention facilities in the state. And they have not been able to do so in in the immigration detention facility in Tacoma. They have been barred from there, I believe, at least 10 times, probably more. But there's no fine in that legislation. So this bill was supposed to rectify that by instituting a minimum fine of $1,000 a day for each day that they were delayed. And it did not pass. Legislators would not support it. So what can we do this next legislative session? Well, we have to start over from scratch. All of these bills are out and we have to start everything from the beginning. And what we really need to look at are these guardrails on federal immigration enforcement in the state. This is affecting our neighbors, our family members, so many people in the state. And the failure of that SAFE Act not to pass means that local jurisdictions are having to deal with the issue. I live in Tacoma, and our school board had to pass one set of rules about banning federal immigration enforcement on school property. The city had to pass another set of ordinance to ban federal immigration enforcement on city property. The parks has yet to do this. Every single jurisdiction throughout this whole state would have to pass their own ordinances at every single jurisdictional level. You can see why this not passing at the state level means so much more work for everybody across the state. It was a real tragedy that it did not pass. Another issue we need to be concerned about are conditions in the detention facility, private detention facility here in the state. There's so many issues. Probably could talk about medical issues. We can talk about food. We could talk about lack of access to legal recourse. There's so many things going on there. We also could talk about assistance to those immigrants, either legal or just money for phone calls or money for being able to buy a prayer rug because they're for sale at a huge profit. And if you're Muslim, you will have to use a towel instead of a prayer rug. And also we will be looking at the priorities of our partner organization, WISOM, Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. They've already announced their priorities for the next legislative session. I think that these are actually mostly non-starters because they're budgetary items, but they're also talking about expansion of Apple healthcare, health equity, and wage replacement for immigrants. This is something that immigrants pay into unemployment, but if you're undocumented, you can't receive it. And so this bill would actually, but again, I don't know that it has much legs because it is a budget issue. Okay, so that's a really quick overview of the way we can use the position and the lobby team. And I would just, again, ask people to, if you are interested in being part of the immigrant rights lobby team, please contact me. I have cards here for anybody who would like to contact me and be part of the lobby team. And questions?
Yeah, questions, and then we'll divide you, and maybe one group start talking about the affinity group and the other the lobby team. And to choose which one you want to do and get some ideas about what our next step should be.
Yes,
Yeah, what are the chances that 5906 will be introduced?
it'd have to be reintroduced. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of, I hope so. Yeah. There's a lot of new legislators coming in and we don't know who they're going to be. A lot of people are resigning or moving on. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens because some of those people have been sponsors of these bills.
The ones who are moving on?
Yeah, there are people stepping down or there's people that are moving to trying to run for other office. So it's going to be interesting. So I can't tell you at this point. Yeah.
So when bills fail to pass and knowing that those most likely involve giving money in some way, do you go back and kind of rethink it and adjust, or do you just put it out again, hopefully, with a better budget?
So for example, with Apple Health expansion, what they did in this last legislative session was there were like 9,000 people that got an expansion from a previous legislative session. 9,000 people who wouldn't have otherwise, who were undocumented. And it was just like a first come, first serve type of thing. They changed the actual Apple Health expansion. So now it actually costs them money and they're covered under fewer things. So it's a compromise to keep it. And I think they expanded it slightly by adding maybe a few hundred people to it. So there are ways that you can take the same amount of money allotted and give more people worse coverage. We all know that because we all have health insurance, right? But the issue is there's over 100,000 people in the state who do not have health insurance because of their immigration status. And those people are going to cost us all money because they're going to wind up in the emergency room. We're all going to pay for that. So it would be so much cheaper if we could just cover them, you know? And so we're going to have to think about ways of talking to hospitals and talking to HMOs and talking to legislators to convince them that, you know, honestly, that it is cheaper to try to actually give people health insurance than to not give people health insurance.
We do not need to convince hospitals.
Right. I was about to say, yeah, the public hospital, particularly in Washington, the public hospital districts are 100% behind everyone having health insurance because they're operating on such thin margins.
Yeah.
And HR1 is the changes in HR1 and the changes in Medicaid reimbursement and the changes in Medicare reimbursement have literally cut everybody's margin to negative.
Right.
And so,
But are they willing to speak up on behalf of immigrants?
Yes.
and I think we're reaching a point really where that's going to play more of a role.
Right,
Yeah.
through the Washington State Hospital Association, there's advocacy on that.
So those are places we need to reach out to. We need to reach out to businesses because for goodness sake, businesses, this is in their best interest too. I think we could get teachers to advocate for this as well, because they certainly want the parents of their kids in their class to have health insurance, because it makes a difference about how kids perform in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So there's places we can reach out to that are not the usual suspects. And in my experience, there's always money for things that people want to do. Yeah. Yes, Shannon.
On the bill about finding the detention facilities that aren't cooperating, I have two questions. One, what was the pushback on that? And two, aren't they under a court order that they're violating? And are they assuming the courts will find them, or how? Why didn't that pass? I guess it's the question.
Honestly, nothing having to do with detention passed, and no one's really willing to come out and say it, but I think it's basically nobody wants to speak on behalf of detained people because they're criminals. You know, and I think that's really the bottom line, is nobody wanted to stick their neck out.
It's election year.
It's election year, yeah. And, yeah, I mean, courts might fine, but the legislature could have had the ability to put a fine in
Right.
place.
Right.
Yeah, Chuck.
Yeah, can you find a difference between an immigrant and a refugee? And what are the? and what are the
Expert here.
numbers? What are the numbers?
It's weird, it's how you get into the US, basically outside the US or inside the US, but you tell me.
Yeah, well, refugees, are people who have a well-founded fear of persecution based on who they are, what's happened to them. Race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, and what else we're getting. And so we have people, or we used to have people, like, this is, what I'm talking about is before the Trump administration, where it is now. What normally was happening is that the president would issue a statement saying that we will admit 100,000 refugees from these countries and for these reasons. And then we had people from mostly non-governmental organizations, but also the UN, that would look for people who met the standard, and then they would come into the US. And so they were already in another country and waiting to see what happened to them, and then they would be addressed. So it was a very interesting program, the way it functioned, because there was input from the nonprofit world, there was input from academics, from others that determined who would be admitted and why they needed to come to the United States. I was on those committees almost every year, doing something with regard to that. Now there's another way people who have a well-founded fear of persecution come in, and that's that they do it illegally. They've got come across the border. It's illegal up to the point that they actually reach the border to get in, but the legislation says that nothing should be done to prevent them from obtaining asylum just because they came in through irregular processes on that. But they are usually either already in the United States and asking for asylum, or they're at the border asking for asylum. Again, that's the way it used to be on that.
And there are over 50 different kinds of immigration status. So there's many ways that people can come.
So immigrants are, on the other hand, are under another system in which we have most of the visas that are available for immigrants are mostly for family reunification. That's the largest number. The next one is or employment. And they can, the employee can bring their children in. And they're on a pathway to citizenship. if they come in through these mechanisms. Then there's a humanitarian system that is beyond the refugee system, that offers some, because people just are in really bad situations. And then there are a couple of other very strange kinds of systems on that. Then there are not what are called non-immigrants, and they're the people who are coming on temporary work visas for the most part. And they most of them cannot remain here permanently. But there are two categories in which you can come in intending to stay in the United States. And those are under particular attack right now, because they are on a pathway to citizenship.
So we got 20 minutes left.
Okay.
She's very, very knowledgeable. She knows everything there is to know about immigration.
Have a quick,
Yeah, sure.
so we're about to break up into two groups, and one is gonna be the lobby group and the other one's gonna talk about affinity groups. Can you
affinity.
talk a little bit more about what you see happening with affinity
Sure.
groups?
Okay, well, the lake has a lot of affinity groups that are either on, sort of processes and with the treasurers get together and stuff like that. But we're starting to move a little bit more also into thematic groups, affinity groups. So if you are interested in immigration and immigrant rights issues, we can, if we start an affinity group, then we'll have the basis for bringing people together to talk about the issues that are really front and center right now and forever. We'll be able to do it. And so what affinity groups, we don't have a statewide affinity group. There are some of the local leagues have a group on immigration issues. So we're trying to, kind of make it sure that there is access for everyone to talking about it. I've been looking at what it is that other states have in bringing people who care about immigration together. They don't necessarily call it affinity group, but there's some language that they're using to see what they're doing. So I think it's a way that we can keep ourselves knowledgeable about what's happening in our own state. And then eventually what the two of us really would like to see happening is that this get broadened out. There is a discussion group nationwide on immigration issues. I'm on the steering committee, and if anyone is interested in signing up for that. And we have irregular, but often enough speakers that come in to talk about an issue that we're all concerned about. And that's sort of where I'm heading on that.
Question back there.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure what you meant when you said we don't have statewide entity groups. We
No. I said we don't have one on
on
immigration.
this issue.
On this issue, yeah. And that's what, other states already have statewide groups that try to learn more about immigration. And we don't.
So if you want to be involved in lobbying, you can still be on the affinity group.
Yeah, we're assuming that the people who are interested enough to be in an affinity group are probably gonna wanna help with some of the lobbying and vice versa on that. So it's not an either or. We wanna go ahead with both. And in fact, even though the affinity group is the one I've been thinking about, I think it's much more important for Lydia to get other people on the lobby team, and there and ready and going. And I think that that is really constraining us a whole lot more in terms of what we can do to put our position into action. As well as the position that we already have on immigration, because you can't really totally separate that. What is decided on who can come into the country is going to determine and how they come into the country, and will determine something with relation to the rights they have.
Question in the back.
Could either or both of you talk a little bit on a higher level around how you would like to see immigration working in this country beyond, we don't have ICE anymore, but just high level, how would you like to see it work?
That would take, all I can say is. I agree with that on that. The last chapter of the book is where we should be going from now. I can tell you at the federal level, immigration reform is extremely difficult. I directed a commission on immigration reform in the 1990s, and I'm still getting calls from members of Congress saying, did the commission ever deal with this issue? And yes, we did, and you didn't do anything about it.
Can you say the name of your book, please, for everyone?
The Nation of Immigrants. It's in the second edition now.
And I will, as I am wont to do, give you a very concise answer, and that is not separate families.
That a crime against humanity?
In my opinion, I would agree with you.
Really, that is, you could take someone to the Hague, right, and try to do that.
That way it's human rights word associated than that.
Is it?
But well, think about it. I mean, we have US citizens who, you know, have committed very, you know, crimes that are not particularly, you know, heinous, on it, who are separated from their children. You know, it's hard to determine where the line is when it comes to people being detained for some reason.
I don't know, you just have to talk to one mother and listen to her cry and tell you how, you know, who was being detained. But it's mostly mothers.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really sad. Yeah.
Lydia, I just want to say one thing. If anyone in this room has not seen Lydia's presentation on the Tacoma gulag, whatever you want to call it. It is an amazing presentation of the facts of geo, et cetera, and it's so inspiring. And yeah, you are awesome.
Is that on
You are awesome.
I think that was completely different than what I was talking about, the way in which detention is given. And, you know, I did a lot of the institute that I supported, you know, ran, we did a lot of things in terms of determining that there are alternatives to detention that should be used. And we worked a lot to just try to get the statistical information in terms of why the cost, on the cost issue, but also on the rights issues, on that. And, during the last administration, there was some progress in shifting a lot, towards, you know, non-detained, detention, effectively, alternatives, and, that completely gone. And, Mr. Coleman was a champion of having alternatives to detention, and so he was not.
And if anybody ever wants to go to the detention facility, contact me. I will take you there. And I will introduce you, and Holly too.
And if you're in Thurston County and you wanna ride with me, I go about twice a week.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
We talk to people who are in detention.
We listen to the mothers cry.
Yeah, a lot of that.
We do a lot of listening and advocacy.
What? Okay, I have your email address. What's your email address?
I got a card, or I can say it.
And
It's
just so you know, so right now there's an MD from Afghanistan who's in there, who is an infectious disease specialist. He works for WHO and he's in detention.
Oh, and he's awesome.
Yeah, he's such a nice man. Yeah.
What I hear you saying is, this is a terrible problem to which there may be no solution.
Right.
Are you saying that all we can do is fiddle around with the edges about the cruelty?
Not at all, and actually there are solutions, and they've been, well, the first commission that I worked on for the federal government, was the one that recommended amnesty, effectively, for what turned out to be 3 million people. And the Congress went through it. I worked with Ted Kennedy and Alan Simpson to figure out how to get that to work. And, it was a bipartisan.
So it's a political problem, basically.
It's a political problem and we need to change, we need a regime change. We need people to vote. And it's actually a bipartisan problem because Democrats and Republicans have both failed in the past 20 years. They vote, they get an F.
International students.
A big F, and that's mine. Now, we're at time now. Someone says, I'm just gonna-
Thank you.
Yeah, I have.